into the Rejecting Average podcast. This is our first go at this, and I'm Chris Betcher. I'm sitting here with my brother Brett, and we're excited to be able to get started with this podcast here today. Brett, what's going on?
Hey, good morning, Chris. Good morning, everybody.
Yeah, for those of you who are first time, we're gonna try to kind of go through a few different things today, like why Rejecting Average, why Brett and I are in the space that we are right now, kind of what this looks like long term in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here with the podcast over the course of the next several months, and kind of how we want this to take shape, and hopefully what you guys can gain out of this as we move forward. So I guess, Brett, I'd like to kind of get started. Obviously you and I are brothers. We come from similar backgrounds in the Midwest and jumped into the healthcare space with our doctorates in physical therapy. Kind of spent a number of years in kind of the hamster wheel of the traditional world. And now we really, work to escape that for a number of reasons. So let's talk about that a little bit. Because I think it's going to be something that people are going to be able to hopefully relate to. And, we want to learn kind of as we go through this podcast from some of the different people we're going to bring in and the conversations we're going to have. But just why don't you get people up to speed with kind of why we're doing this in the first place?
Yeah, Chris and I don't necessarily want this podcast to be about us, but we want to give our background here to get things started. So, we were, as you mentioned, working in physical therapy and specifically in the home health space. If you're not familiar, what that means is people who have been discharged from the hospital, they go home, or they got discharged from a nursing facility and they end up going home. So our job is to really help them bridge the gap between the hospital and ultimately keep them out of the hospital again. And if you've ever been near that space, what you recognize is there's a lot of very sick people out there. And I would argue that a good portion, the majority of them are in that position through a combination of lifestyle factors, and really have the ability to kind of reclaim their health if they choose to, and if they go down the right path with the right guidance. On the flip side, we saw a lot of people who ended up in a bit more of this revolving door system where they're home for a month or two and then they end up back in the hospital. And I think for Chris and I, that was a very frustrating time because as many people as you feel like you're helping, there are a lot more where you go into the home and recognize that in 2 hours a week that you're spending with this person, there's not a single thing you're going to do from an exercise standpoint that's going to undo all of the processed foods that they're eating, the handfuls of medications that they're taking, which in many cases they need to take, but on other times it's like they don't even know why they're taking them. And Chris and I's job as part of the physical therapy team was to go through all of those medications with them and help clarify some of that alongside of exercise and some rehab work that we were doing. But when you start to see, these people are taking medications, drugs like Skittles, and they don't even really know what most of them are for. They can't even tell you what they do. They don't know why they're on them. And some of it's just a disconnect between, provider and patient. And a lot of times there's a bit of a, maybe a learning curve that's just not there for them. But ultimately it led to a little bit of a burnout for Chris and I to be, spending time, energy, and kind of seeing that we weren't really serving and making that impact that we wanted to make on a lot of people. So we took a step back. We wanted to do more of a preventative role and, really steering people away from a lot of the pharmaceuticals as the primary form of intervention. And that really just means, getting your nutrition in order, getting your activity up, and ultimately recognizing that, that's going to be way more impactful, at least for the people who are willing and able to put in, some of that effort. And that really is the foundation of the Rejecting Average podcast in a lot of ways is really what that means to me is we always have this choice to make between, I can go this path or that path. And a lot of times we pick the easy path. It's just human nature to seek that comfort. But at the end of the day, I think most of what we're after, whether it's health, financial resources, whether it's, leading our families to a better position, most of that comes down to kind of taking that other path less traveled. And quote unquote rejecting average along the way. So I guess, Chris, I'm curious, what does something like Rejecting Average mean to you? We could talk a little bit more about our backgrounds as we get further into this, but what does rejecting average mean to you, and why do we kind of land on that as the name of this going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you touched on this a little bit already, but you talked about like the path less traveled, and I think it's more of like the path that we're not being guided towards in the first place. I think there's so much of what we do on a day-to-day basis with education and just, the financial systems. And part of me wants to really dive in on this podcast to like talking about kind of the brokenness of systems. You alluded to this when you talked about the way the healthcare system is wired to kind of keep us sick and to treat symptoms instead of, root causes and things like that. But it's true on like all levels of, so much of what we're told to do from, I remember going through high school and undergrad and just thinking like, what are we doing here? Like, none of this makes any sense. I feel like I'm taking a path because I'm being told to, because I'm not given other options. And so it's like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of be a bit of cattle here and continue to do what everybody else is doing because I don't have any idea what else I'm supposed to be doing. And then, the whole time you're questioning, what are we actually trying to accomplish? Like, none of this is leading me where I actually want to go. It's just where everybody else is going. So I guess I'll follow along. I think it took both of us more time than I care to admit to get to the point where it's like, no, I'm done with this. Like, I'm not putting things in my body because my employer says I need to in order for me to continue to work. I'm not going to continue to go through the motions of, trying to just get by and, be buried in student loan debts and all these things that so many people I think resonate with, that we just have to like empower ourselves on some level to follow a different path. So like, that's what it looks like for me. And, it's something that like, we're figuring this out every day. We're not going to sit here and pretend like you've got it all figured out and that we're somehow on a different level where we want to kind of be on everybody else's level and like figure this out together and be able to have some really cool conversations, for the two of us unpacking some things, bringing some people in that are a lot smarter than us on other things to just like, hopefully, kind of create this community and this tribe that can tread a different path. I mean, that's what rejecting average looks like to me. We've taken some steps. We're going to talk about some of the steps that we've taken, how we've kind of put some systems in our life, to be able to kind of get to this point. Because I think it really comes down to like being able to step away from what society tells us we need to do and just being willing to do something that maybe looks foreign, looks crazy, and realizing you're not alone. And I guess I'd like to get your perspective on that too, Brett. Like, you and I have had each other to be able to bounce ideas off of, but I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. A lot of people feel like they're alone. They're questioning what they're doing, trying to figure out where to get started. So, kind of where do you think people could kind of take those initial, first steps, because they feel like they've been held back to this point?
Yeah, it's a good question, and something I think we've taken a little bit for granted at times along the way is that there has been two of us. I mean, that's really how this started, is we were having some of those conversations via, I was living in Colorado, you were out in South Carolina, so we were across the country, but still able to have some phone calls where we were coming to the same conclusion at the same time about, how the system was set up, the response to the response back in 2020, everything along with that. So we were just on the same page. And I think having somebody to communicate that with was very empowering because, it can feel very isolating if you don't have that. And I think there's a point where, as you touched on, being willing to look a little crazy, I think is actually a very important piece of the puzzle, and recognizing that like it is okay to feel very uncomfortable, and oftentimes it's actually that discomfort that's probably the place you need to go and step into. That's always easier said than done, but like I said, it leads me back to the idea that you and I talked about doing something for, I don't know, a year, maybe 2 years total before we actually committed to doing the initial podcast, which led to posting on Twitter, now X, and kind of seeing things take off from there. But it really, it came down to the idea that we were sitting around discussing ideas, which was empowering. But then there was a point where you needed to actually take action on some of those ideas. And I think we spent too much time in that pre-planning phase, not enough time actually getting started with things. So that would always be my suggestion. Kind of the takeoff point for people is like, you're never going to have it figured out. You're never going to feel comfortable. You're never going to feel like you know what you're doing until you actually start. You might fail. You start again. You might fail again. And ultimately, it's actually those little failures. They become learning curves where you figure out what you need to do differently. You try some things differently. And, as long as you keep showing up, truly, I don't believe that there is a failure point along the way. So I know for you and I, that was a major sticking point where we really weren't willing to bet on ourselves and truly go for it. As many ideas as we thought we had. So I guess, I'm kind of curious to hear from you. I mean, what do you think was holding us back from kind of pushing forward with it as many times as we chatted prior? And I guess, what do you think kind of holds the average person back from really just betting on themselves?
Yeah, I mean, you could go so many different directions with that. I mean, I think part of it too is that we live in a pretty comfortable society. Even those people that, we were there, we had mortgages, we had student debt, we had families to provide for. But life, like, we never had to worry about food being on the table. We never had to worry about like sleeping in our car. So there's this comfort factor that I think is there for most people, that they never really hit a point where they truly need to take immediate action. And so you can kind of kick the can down the road for a long time. And I think some of that's intentional too. You can keep people and you can keep a society pretty docile when they're semi-comfortable and they're getting a lot of cheap dopamine hits from, social media and, professional sports and alcohol and things like that. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with any of those things, but you have to understand that there's just like cheap dopamine hits that are coming in time after time after time from those things. And if you're never able to like step back, have some time to reflect, have some time to figure out like, what do I want out of this life? Then you're going to be in a position where you just keep spinning your wheels and Sunday night comes and that, kind of that Sunday gloom where you're like, man, I got to do this all over again this week. And nothing ever changes. So there's the comfort piece. I think even like we called it like a golden handcuff all the time, like with our jobs where you're making decent money. You may be super unhappy with it, but you're still able to provide. And I think that's a tricky thing to step away from as well, which I think for us is why like the podcast side made a lot of sense, is because, and it's for some people, this might even be something like just a simple side hustle where they spend, a couple hours a week trying to like build something else or build themselves. If you're feeling like physically broken with your health, you're not happy, you're not confident in who you are, the first thing you might want to do is just start focusing on how do I take care of myself? How do I drop some weight? How do I feel better, get some strength? Because when you start to build confidence in yourself, like you do feel like you can take action in a more confident way, as opposed to just, not feeling like you're worthy of anything, not feeling like you're going to be able to accomplish anything. And, I'd be lying if I said I'd be sitting here feeling like you and I are, feeling 100% confident in this right here. I mean, it's laughable how much time it took us to just set up for kind of round two of being able to get this first episode out. And so like there is that fear. That fear doesn't go away, but when you start to go through that process time after time after time, you realize that fear is not really real. It's more of just something your brain is creating. And once you kind of step into the fire and you do that 2, 3, 4 times, you're just willing to bet on yourself on a consistent basis. And that's really what it comes down to, is like, these can be small bets at first of like, hey, I'm just going to spend 30 extra minutes a day trying to like take a walk outside or write down some ideas that I have or lift weights or, do some meal prep. Like there's 1,000 different directions that we can take this on an individual level based on what your goals are. But it really just comes down to like a willingness to bet on yourself in a meaningful way every single day.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm biased. I think we're biased because of the field that we're in. But I think that health is as good of a place to start as anything when it comes to making that transition. Because, yeah, I mean, you can look at obviously family, finances, whatever it is. Those are all important. But at the end of the day, like our energy levels and kind of the frame of mind that we're in, how we feel all day, I would argue most of that is going to boil down to our physical health. And if that's not a priority, you're not taking care of your body, it's very difficult to continue to put the time and energy and effort into whatever else you're trying to pursue, to be at your best as a parent, to try to step into a new role as a coach or whatever it would be. It's like if you're just struggling with energy and not in a good frame of mind mentally, it's going to be difficult to be at your best with any of those things. So that's where I do think prioritizing health, I think for us, health, kind of reprioritizing that was a big piece of the puzzle. Maybe an underrated part for us is that, we went from a position of obviously being in good health. Chris is a 10-time Ironman. I was playing some basketball through college, and we were always in good health growing up, very active. And then stepping into that provider role, as you talked about, it becomes easy to put that on the back burner. Health is always the first thing that gets shelved when we have other responsibilities at play. And again, I think that's human nature, because your short-term health is not really, you're not really weighing out the long-term ramifications of what you're doing. But by just stepping in and reprioritizing our health, I know for me personally, cleaning up my diet, getting back in the gym, I felt better. And then because of that, I felt like, I have the energy now to, still work long hours, but also come home and, do some podcasting, do some writing and things like that on the side, where without that extra energy level, it probably would have just been, continuing to get distracted, sit on social media, watch a bunch more sports or whatever was on. So, again, I love sports. I love watching the Packers and, catching. We got NCAA March Madness kicking off here. So I'm a huge fan. At the same time, I do think there's a point where like more is not helping you. And it's very easy to get caught up in that, just watching anything and everything that's on. Whereas, if you just take, an hour to yourself here or there, what you're actually able to accomplish with a little bit of dedicated time. I mean, we weren't putting a ton of time into this when we first started. It was more of like that side hustle role, as you mentioned. But because we stuck a little time in here, a little time in there, we were actually able to build something. So there's not one way to go about it. But at the end of the day, I think getting your health in order, or at least making it a priority, was a huge launching point for us. And I kind of encourage anybody who's struggling and looking to get started. Health is the one spot that I'd argue we have the most control over. You can't always control what's happening, with your finances. Or any of these other fields. You can't always control, the way your kids are acting, things like that. But at the end of the day, I truly believe like we have full control over what we put in our bodies, the foods that we eat, whether or not we're able to consistently get to the gym. Those are just things that it's up to us. And I think the more control you have over something, the more empowering that can be. Once you actually put the time and energy into it to see the results that you're looking for, you get kind of that idea of, okay, if I did this and I was able to accomplish it, what else can I do? And becomes very empowering to be able to put that into other areas of your life.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned like a handful of things there on the health side of things, and I would agree. There's no question about it, but like not everybody's goals are necessarily going to be health driven either. But even if you're looking to like build a business and create more financial security, or a side hustle that gives you an extra, 20% income, or, for some people, we'll talk about this too, but like just being a better spiritual leader in your home. Like those are all things that when you're healthy, you have energy for. And when you're able to kind of look at your energy as like it's not a limitless thing, just like our time. We don't have limitless resources available when it comes to time and energy. So we kind of have to do an accounting for where those things are being taken from us throughout the day. And, I think for us, like we both feel like, our family, our jobs, our spiritual health, our overall physical and mental health, like those are things we want to be kind of taking big pieces of the pie. We don't want to be kind of outsourcing those things in large chunks to, 25 hours a week watching sports and things like that. And that's where I think we both were. There's no question about it. We would come home from work and we were just done. Like, I remember, my wife would go to bed. I'd put my daughter down. This is when we have 4 kids now, but when we only had one, And I have way more energy with 4 kids than I had with one, because I was just literally numbing myself at every waking moment because I was so unhappy with my current situation. And that was it. It didn't take a lot, and maybe you would disagree with this, but like, you start making 2 3 small adjustments to your day every day, and you recognize like how much more mental clarity you have, how much more energy you have, and that you can come home from work and not just like numb yourself watching a random college basketball game, that you can actually run outside and play with your kids. And yeah, you have better time to connect with your spouse at night. And it opens up the door to just, to me, like deeper connections. And as we continue to like, I think in general, maybe this is a little bit of a side note, but like, we're gonna see the world crave those deep connections more and more. We live in a world right now where we have greater access to connection than ever before because of social media, but yet we feel more isolated than ever. We're a very depressed, anxious society because we don't have the ability to connect. And I think a lot of that ties back to all of our energy and all of our bandwidth is being poured into things that are just not that important. So just trying to create that intentionality. And I do think that hopefully this podcast will help with just helping people be more intentional, but not feel like all of these things require a lot of energy either. That they, I think of health as just running on autopilot in my life. Like, I don't have to make these decisions. They just happen because I've built the system. And so, we want to help people build systems. We want to help people kind of break free and even question some of the systems that are at play right now. Like, we don't want to sit here and be doomers. Like, I think you and I both have a very, practical, realist kind of perspective on the world. But you also have to understand some of the things that you are up against. And once you recognize that, then you can start finding ways to create some boundaries and sort of fight back, kind of get into the fight in some ways. Because if you don't recognize what you're up against, it's really easy to just go through the motions of life at that point.
Yeah, and I think that, like you said, we can dig into some of those on the financial side of things. Obviously, I think everybody feels the impacts of inflation and really what that means going forward. So yeah, being able to unpack a few of those things, again, building systems, trying to help people achieve some level of financial independence, or call it even just like a little bit of a cushion so that there's not so much stress month to month. And then yeah, on the parenting side, same idea. I think the way the modern culture steers the average person, if you're not paying attention to it, can be a slippery slope. So being able to, as you said, get back in the fight there, just taking a little bit more control over the household, being able to kind of prioritize things again, and and the lack of distractions that come with that. So yeah, I'm on board, and I'm excited to be able to unpack a lot of those things and get guests on here who, as you mentioned, especially on the financial side of things, know more about, more experts in different niches that can kind of unpack what they do and ultimately help give everybody else an edge in the process. So I guess, yeah, Chris, I'm kind of excited to hear from you on, more of the idea of, I guess, what kind of excites you going forward about what we're going to be talking about here, or what should people look forward to in regards to the Rejecting Average podcast?
I mean, to me, it kind of goes back to what really pushed us along early on, 3.5, 4 years ago, is kind of the tribe mentality. Like, we found people that were across the country from us that shared similar, we might not have been having like conversations on a daily basis or things along those lines, but we were hearing from people that really saw the world in a similar light and didn't pretend to have it all figured out. And I think Brett and I, again, I said this earlier, but we don't have it all figured out. We're not here to sit here to preach. We're here to have conversation and hopefully create a bit of a culture that does look a little bit different than what you see, the rest of the day, and that can be empowering. And I think that's what, you and I, we really got a ton of energy from those initial conversations that we had together and with guests, and just the feedback that we were getting. And that, I think we both missed that. So, selfishly, I'm looking forward to being able to do that again, because it's been a couple of years since we've been able to have these types of conversations and get into the weeds on some things on, yes, health and, spiritual leadership and, financial side of things. And yeah, certainly, again, finding those people that are experts in a number of different areas, but deep down, it's still rooted in the same belief structure, the same value structure that, I think the world is desperately craving. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this is when you choose to kind of step outside the norm and tread a little bit different path, it might feel isolating at first, but you very quickly realize that there are so many people that are looking for exactly the same thing. And all of a sudden, you start having conversations about something that, you're reluctant to even bring up, and it feels a little edgy once in a while. And then you're like, I've thought, you hear people, I have conversations with neighbors now all the time who are like, 5 years ago, I would have never even attempted to talk about something like that. And all of a sudden, they're just like, yeah, I've thought about this forever. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up. And like, now you have like a bit of a deeper bond, because they're so used to those superficial conversations that have, I don't want to say they're meaningless. Like there's certainly merit to talking about the local sports teams and things like that. And that's fine. But like, that's not what life is all about. We should be connecting with people on a deeper level. And so hopefully being able to find that tribe, being able to empower people to have more of those conversations, connect with more of those people, either locally or, across the country, across the world.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, just the idea that, as you mentioned, I think there are a ton of people out there kind of looking for something, looking for, stepping outside of that comfort zone. They just don't really know how to bridge that gap. And, I think sometimes you have to be the man in the arena, so to speak, where, it might make people a little uncomfortable at first, but yeah, breaking the ice on some of those conversations and seeing where it goes. And to be honest, I think that's kind of how you find your people or don't find your people. It kind of, shines light on who do you actually want to connect with on a deeper level. Not everyone's going to agree with you. Not everyone's going to see eye to eye, and that's okay. And you just steer that ship somewhere else, and you're going to be able to kind of find those people who are in a similar mindset as you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be a good time. Fun conversations. We're going to learn a ton. And yeah, we just want to be able to bring value, week in and week out with this thing. So looking forward to coming back again next week with episode 2. And appreciate you guys checking in for this first episode of the Rejecting Average podcast. See you guys next week.